All right, hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today we're sitting down with my friend Kevin Sweeney to talk about his soon-to-be released book, The Making of a Mystic, and it's subtitled My Journey with Mushrooms, My Life as a Pastor, and Why It's Okay for Everyone to Relax. And so, Kevin, welcome to the
Yes.
show. I've been
Yeah.
looking forward to this.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Glenn. I've told people this. I love hearing the subtitles read out loud.
That's what
It's
caught my
so
attention. I'm like, oh.
it's funny. And obviously there's like intentionality where I'm like, okay, it's clever. But at the same time, those three things really capture one, the heart of the book, but also my journey and experience as a whole. So yes, I'm like, it's funny and it's like supposed to be intriguing, but I'm like, it actually accurately is this like container that holds together my life and the movement of the book. So yeah, man, I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I got a lot of people I think need to relax. So I have a list of people I want to give the book to.
There you go. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome. So hey, before we get too far into the book, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, especially people who don't know you, aren't familiar with you. Who are you? What do you do? How is living in Hawaii? Is it as glamorous as we all imagine it to be? Is that out your window right there? That's Hawaii? I'm assuming.
Yeah, if I could, I don't want to like, I have, since I have
Can't
a
mess
little,
up too much.
this camera, this is like downtown
Oh,
Honolulu.
there it is.
There's a harbor, it goes to the ocean right out there. I'm like two
Man,
blocks from the water right now on the 37th floor of this building. So
I'm not jealous or anything.
I mean, I've surfed within the last 24 hours yesterday. So
Yeah.
it's everyday life out here. And I will say the day-to-day realities for people living here are a lot more challenging and a lot harder, and it's more of a struggle than people realize.
Sure.
But at the same time, it is that beautiful. It's such a special place. The people, the land. If you are not from here, which I'm not, I grew up in Los Angeles and moved here at 18. If you're not from here and you feel a sense of embrace from the islands themselves, from the people, it's really, really special. And, my wife and I basically stayed here since college. And so it's amazing. I love it. I love where I live. I can't even lie about it.
That's awesome. And
But
you
yeah,
passed,
I mean,
you pastor a church, right? In Hawaii?
yes, my wife and I started a church here called Imagine. And that was almost 10 years ago. And so at 28, we moved back here after school and grad school and doing that. And our bigger picture of moving back was, yes, of course, we just wanted to live here. But I did feel this larger sense of there's this new community, this new church with a new way of being that seems to want to be birthed out of us. And that was our sort of bigger picture moving back here. And we started in our house, but eventually all our energy was focused on this neighborhood, which I'm just on the edge of downtown. It's the unofficial arts district called Kaka'ako. It was an up and coming neighborhood about a decade ago. It still is. And for me, it was a small slice of what more and more of the culture would look like as time goes on. And we just thought it would be these new communities, these new neighborhoods, oftentimes I think benefit from a new liberated pastoral imagination that is not trying to recreate the past, but is honoring the past while trying to focus on creating the future. That's why one of our things was like, we're following Jesus into the future. And so, yeah,
he's not stuck. He's not stuck in the past, Kevin. He's not luring us back to the, to the
it
past.
Seems to me that, Jesus never got in trouble, or Jesus was never angry at people for trying to widen the circle of inclusion, or create something that's wider and create something that's more inclusive and hopeful. It seemed like some of his greatest critiques were for people who still were trying to recreate and white knuckle and hold on to the past. So I think that was true back then with the explosive thing he was doing in that context. And I think it's true for what the Spirit is still doing explosively in any context today. And sometimes we are close enough to the edge to be a part of that fun, challenging, amazing moment of creating a future. So yeah, my energy for pre-COVID, before the shutdown for 7-ish years was hyper local. These people, this community, this neighborhood, this moment, this conversation. I didn't spend 7 years trying to build a platform. I didn't spend 7 years trying to make myself marketable or brand myself. I was like, for the most part, totally immersed in and focused on what I was doing here. And that was a great gift in my life. And there's so much wisdom and so much learning and so many good things that came out of that. Sure. Although we are now, if it was a 3-hour episode, you know, I could tell you all the details, but we actually announced that we're in the final chapter of Imagine.
Oh, really?
I don't know if you saw that. Yeah, we announced in January.
That. Okay.
Yeah, so in January, coming back from Christmas, we announced we're in the last chapter. We're going to go till June or July, so it'll probably be towards the end of May.
Okay.
And yeah, that's a bigger picture. I always sensed I would do this for about 10 years. I didn't really see myself being in this role of a lead pastor forever.
Sure.
And it was that mixed with the challenges of COVID and reopening, where it just kind of led us to all these points of convergence where my wife and I just sensed there's the new risk and new things for the next 10 years that will look different from the previous 10. Well, to me, I tell people the flow of my life is the same, but the form will look different.
Yeah.
The substance of what I'm doing and who I am remains, but the structure of it will adapt and change. And because for my wife's a marriage and family therapist as well, and a pastor. I've been a pastor and writer now and doing what I do. I'm like, our work is always the same, of healing and opening up imaginations and creating. So for me, it's a big deal, but it also just feels like so much continuity that it feels very natural and organic as well.
That's awesome. So when you say that the church in this last season, like the church is going to actually close, or are you okay? So the church will dissolve and then people will go and do their thing.
Yeah, I think, years ago when I sensed there would come a time for me to change my role, there was moments where I considered, maybe there will be the right person or couple or whatever it is to encourage and lead, and maybe I'll go do other things and still be connected and preach sometimes if they need me, or I would have loved to have done something like that.
Yeah.
But just from the uniqueness of the culture of Imagine, especially here, where it's very unique and different relative to a lot of churches and church culture here. And after COVID and just moving and people fading and all of that, I was like, this is not in a place for somebody to come in and rebuild it. It just isn't. And I'm grateful that my wife and I did not take on the unnecessary obligation where somehow the value of Imagine is contingent upon it continuing without us.
Yeah.
We're like, hey, that was what it was for that decade or so. Those people, those stories, that moment, and there's lasting effects for the future, obviously. But we also were like, that was a season, and that's okay. And it doesn't have to exist in perpetuity for us to see it for the sacred endeavor that it was. So I'm glad we were on the same page with that to be able to move forward.
And I love that, because you spend a decade with people, and obviously new people are coming and going over the course of those 10 years. People don't stay all the time, the whole time, but you have some people who are lifers who've probably been there for the whole time. But whatever the case is, like, people have come, they've kind of eaten from the fruit of the tree, so to speak, but now they can go out as seeds and they can kind of plant what you have all learned together in their places. So it's really like the church isn't ending. It's just really just branching out and it's evolving. It's becoming something that's different than it has been. I think that's beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're definitely there, man.
That's awesome. So your book, Making of a Mystic.
Yes,
I guess my first question would be, are you a mystic? Is that how you would define yourself? And assuming that that's what you are, how would you define that word? Because I feel like that word has like a lot of baggage with it, because I hear sometimes people define mysticism or what is a mystic, and I think in my mind, that's not how I would define a mystic. Then I define a mystic. If I get into a conversation, I was like, well, I see it very differently. So how do you see it? What is a mystic in your mindset, to kind of set up the rest of the book for us?
Yeah, one of the great living mystics, and when I say that about people, I don't say that lightly at all, because
it's not just a term you throw out.
Yeah, I think there's people who are moving toward the mystical, which I believe that just means their faith is moving from belief systems and dogma to direct experience of spirit, so I think people make a move to the mystical, but when I say like a great living mystic, those are very, for me, rare. They're not everywhere. There's not a lot. And
Yeah.
but one of the great living mystics, Mirabai Starr, whose work and contribution I just love, and her book Wild Mercy, it's actually sitting right next to me. Her book Wild Mercy, is called Living the Fierce and Tender Wisdom of the Women Mystics, is one of the best books I've read in a few years. It's amazing. Yeah. And she's connected with Roar CAC and does stuff with them. So, yeah. She writes from a real inner spiritual sense, like she's Jewish, and then kind of has, draws from different traditions very freely.
Sure.
But she says a mystic is one who has direct experience of the sacred, unmediated by conventional religious rituals. And she goes on, she has a broader description, but that direct experience of the sacred, this direct knowing of spirit, this to know God is actually to be known by God.
Yeah.
And to see is actually to be seen, and to love is actually to be loved. So the foundational experience of the mystic is not, here's what I believe about God, although we have beliefs. It's not, here's thoughts I have about the divine. It is actually this direct, in the Eastern traditions, they would say identity as the divine. I would say more Western mystics, it's more of the sacred union, where there's almost no lines there, but they probably still maintain a few distinctions there. But for the mystic, it's not the menu, it's the meal. Right? It's not the map of the terrain, it is the traversing, the walking, the barefooted on the grass of the terrain, right? The mystic is not arguing over the properties of water. The mystic is living in the ocean and eventually waking up as the ocean. So that's why the mystics are poets, because they're not coming away with dogma or doctrine. They're coming away with beauty. They're coming away with poetry. They're coming away with, I'm going to use words to describe this, but it's not because it captures it as a whole. It's because it invites you into the reality of it, which is actually where transformation happens, which is actually where we know we're loved, which is actually where we move from what Ken Wilber would call a translative version of the faith, which gives you a different translation for your false self. And it's actually a transformative faith, which completely transcends the false self, and this waking up into our larger self with the capital S, in Christ, in God, however you want to say that. So the mystic doesn't have to hold on to anything, because they experience for themselves what it is to be held by everything. And that is a very different posture to take in our world as a religious person, as a spiritual person, or whatever it is. So I could go on and on, but I'll
you gave
stop
me like so many quotable things. I have like, so you just hit so many things. I was like, wow, I don't know what to, I don't want to write down everything, but I have to go back later and write it back down, because it's so good.
I'm not going to lie. That is one thing I really love in life, is like, and just, it kind of naturally comes out of me, but I'm also intentional of like just one-liner quotes.
Yeah, definitely.
Like the turn of the word, I love all that.
You turn on, you have your preacher mode right there.
Oh man, I can't turn it off, bro. It's all the time.
That's awesome. Do you know Alexander John Shaya?
Not personally, but yes, I do.
You know of his work. Yeah. Yeah. So I do social media for him, and I would consider him to be a mystic. He's someone who, I mean, he has influenced me like so much, and he's kind of really the one who sent me down this trail. But like, one of the things he talks about a lot is that idea of being held by everything, and and he talks about the Christ, and all these different things. But I think it's so, everything you just said, like my mind is just spinning, because I'm in this place right now where I'm trying to deconstruct, for lack of a better word, so much of my past experience in the church, in the evangelical church, and just doctrine and dogma and theology and all these different things. And I've come to this place where, with Alexander, and I've told him this before, that all my life, like my teachers, I've always wanted to know what they know. Tell me what you know. Tell me the books you've read. Tell me how to understand this idea. How do I explain this idea? All these things. But with him, like, you're one of the first people I've really just wanted to know, not really what you know, but the source of where this comes from, because you have some kind of connection with something, and I know it's God, but it's not the same kind of connection I have. And I just want to understand more about that source that you know. And so that's, for me, like that's, I think, is really the heart of being a mystic, is what you just said, is about that, the connection with the source, not so much the connection with the knowledge
Absolutely
that comes from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, that is, I mean, one from my taking in of, the words of, of Alexander Shaya, I would say that is true for him. Who I would look at a person and be like, if you want to know, if I look at great living mystics, I can look at a Mirabai, like in our culture who we're familiar with, you can look at a Mirabai Star, look at a Richard Rohr, look at a James Finley, Cynthia Berger, like anyone at CAC basically, because Rohr, his wisdom is able to sense and resonate with the people who have seen, the wisdom of, Barbara Holmes over there and the people that Rohr is connected with. But Alexander John Shaya, he's one of those people, again, I don't say it lightly, but you're like, there's, when somebody knows,
right?
You can feel it. And, there's a great distinction between spiritual intelligence and spiritual experience, or what Ken Wilber would call waking up and growing up, to the spiritual intelligence is, yes, you have a more sophisticated, more inclusive, more broader understanding of reality, of God, of humanity, of whatever it is. And that's all great, and it's necessary, and it's helpful to be a person whose love is liberated for the sake of all people and the planet and all living beings, as opposed to just my little ethnocentric tribe that I'm a part of. But spiritual intelligence is not spiritual experience. That's right. It is not direct knowing. It is understanding. The other one is a direct knowing. And the spiritual experience, that's what leads you to waking up. That's what bears the fruit of joy, peace, and freedom. I know a lot of people who are very progressive, and I probably agree with a lot of their theology, but if you get around them, you're like, they're still just as neurotic. Their ego is still just as much in the driver's seat. They're still just as anxious or ladder climbing as other people. They just happen to be more progressive. So their spiritual intelligence has evolved. That's awesome. But the direct knowing that leads to the fruit of joy, peace, and freedom, you can tell, you can feel the gravitas, the weight, the energy of a person who's just grounded. That's why the mystics don't come away with doctrine. The mystics come away from their life of silence and they're like, everything's going to be okay. And they know that for themselves, and they're not naive to the suffering of the world. They're not naive to the reality of death. And we just came after Easter. They're not naive to the cross and to Good Friday. They've gone fully into that and have felt it and exhausted the power of it in our own body in the same way I believe Christ did on the cross, and yet still carried it through to the other side. And they're like, but we're still okay. And the mystic, that's why the mystic, those pictures of the Buddha over time with like a subtle smile. I'm like, that subtle smile is what is silently and mysteriously passed down through the perennial tradition of mystics without even knowing it. A subtle smile that's like, hey, it's not that. That's why the last part of the subtitle, why it's okay for everyone to relax. Like we're all, I get it all. It is that hard. It is that tragic. Our friends are getting divorced. There is untimely death. There are wars happening in the world. There's all kinds of injustice. No one's denying any of that. And yet somehow the mystic can still hold it all together in that non-dual embracing mind and say, but everything's still okay somehow mysteriously. Like everything isn't good, but everything's okay. That is the paradox of the life of a mystic right there. Yeah.
That's so good. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, to kind of pick your brain about, is that non-dualistic kind of mindset, because again, coming out of the evangelical world, and just a little bit of my background, I went to a private Christian school from the 4th through 12th grades. I went to 4 years of Bible college. I went to seminary. I pastored a church, went back to seminary, very evangelical, all in this evangelical
I'm going to do everything a good Christian boy is supposed to do.
I am going to be the poster child for Christianity. That was me. And I memorized all the answers. Not like I read Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict and, Wayne Grudem's Systematic Theology. These were like my other Bibles, so to speak.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Wayne.
Exactly. 100%. Exactly. And I still have it down there. I haven't opened it in a long time, but it's there to remind me. But anyway, it was like that world is so it was so dualistic for me. It was always, it was either or, it was good or bad. It was light and darkness. And the light and darkness piece was huge because even like in school, like we took classes called like power encounter, where we would learn about the kingdom of darkness, and demons, and you had to pray against the darkness. And it was like, obviously there's things in this life that, happen that you can't help, but there's also things, we were taught that anything that's coming into your life that's bad, that's negative, that's not good and joyful and all these things and peaceful, that's most likely from the devil. So you need to learn how to pray against those things. And so much of my life was spent praying against the bad and praying against the darkness and praying against the things that hurt, the things that bring pain. And now I'm in this space again where I'm learning, like, wait a minute, that seems like so much wasted energy. Because whereas in the past, I focused all of my attention out, where I need to push, and just welcome in the good things. Now I'm in this place where I'm trying to turn my attention inward and say, okay, well, let me sit with this pain and let me sit with this darkness and let me almost befriend this pain and let me ask this, talk to this thing and understand what it is and why it's here and how it can be integrated into my life as opposed to cast away and demonized as something that's evil, something that's bad. And so I just wanted to throw it out there for you to respond to, but that's kind of the space that I'm finding myself in these days, especially in regards to things I'm learning from Alexander and people like yourself.
Yeah, my experience, like hearing that story, for example, like I ended up at a Bible college at 22 or whatever, 21 maybe. And it was, it was a charismatic school. It was a Foursquare, if anyone knows what that denomination is. It's like a Pentecostal denomination.
Sure.
Very theology, very conservative, but also very like tongues and everything else. And it was cool with me. Like, I'm like, hey, I ate mushrooms and experienced God. Like, you want to talk about speaking in tongues? I never heard of them, but like, I don't expect this to not be weird. I remember thinking that, like, it's cool. I'm open to weird stuff.
Let's get nuts.
I definitely wasn't like, I immediately say yes to it, but I was like, that's interesting, because the people there talked about that type of stuff as if it was just like a Wednesday afternoon. Like, I cast out a demon and spoke in tongues. So I'm like, all right, I guess. I mean, that's one way to live.
Yeah.
But I went to Catholic school first, second, third grade, and then stopped going. And then within not too long after, eventually in my young childhood, like, I don't know, 12-ish or something, I stopped going to mass. And my parents didn't force me to do that. And I'm grateful for that. I'm like, I talked to my mom recently about it, and she's like, she wanted to push it further. And my dad was like, just let them be. Like, let the kids be. They're old enough to make that decision. Like, and I'm grateful for my dad giving us the freedom at that age, because I left, and I wasn't no dramatic, like, I'm leaving the church when I stopped going to mass at 12 or whatever age. I told my mom, it was like I left with a pleasant indifference towards God, life, church. I had no oppositional energy, no antagonism, no bad experiences, no shame from it, no guilt. But I also I didn't leave with this clear idea of, and this is what it means to have Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. Like, I had never heard that phrase.
Right.
But that indifference served me well, because I was never fighting things. I wasn't overcoming religious baggage. So when I say in the book how mushrooms, like I have a chapter in the book called Mushrooms and Missionaries, and how mushrooms became this unexpected guide for me in this journey towards truth. I'll say, when I had the spontaneous awakening moment with God at 18, there was no altar calls, no youth group, no pastor walking alongside of me, no kid inviting me to church camp. It was my own journey of exploration, my own radical inward journey into myself, where I discovered within myself the depths of God, and I discovered the depths of myself within that, and saw the connection between those two. The reason why I say that is I didn't have that fighting the darkness energy. I didn't have guilt and shame. I didn't have no, it's not the devil's trying to get you. You have wounds that are unhealed.
That's right.
It's not, oh, there's this plan, this roaring lion or whatever the people say about the Bible. That's always, I mean, about the devil. That's always
prowling around, right? James.
I'm like, oh no, actually, there's illusions I have about life that I need to surrender. And to me, that's so much of like the God's doing this or the devil's doing that. Beneath the surface of that is a very disempowered way of being.
Yeah.
It's always like the gods, the spirits, the devils, the angels, they're all doing things. And I'm just like passively reacting and responding.
Yeah.
And the way I first experienced God in light in my own journey was spirit, God is present and inviting us forward. And I still see like that, like I wouldn't have said it at that point, but I'm like, God and spirit is present, alive, soaking this world, present within us, inviting us forward. And we have the choice whether or not to cooperate, align, surrender, and let go of the things that allow us to remain in that flow. That's an empowering thing because I'm getting in the way. Yeah. That's why I think somewhere in the book, the issue is never whether or not God's on the way. It's the fact that we're getting in the way.
Yeah.
It's not, let me go scream at the devil and get the spirits out of here for a while. It's, oh no, I still believe if enough people give me applause and praise me, that's going to make me happy and whole. And I've given 80% of my energy in my life to that. Oh, if I actually surrender that illusion because it's not real, that just opened up all of this space within me to experience the perpetual incoming of Christ into my life. And that's empowering because I know spirit has their role in being present, inviting, but I have a role because I could get in the way of that very easily. And one more thing I would say about what you said is if people learn along the way, to fight something is to actually get power and to strengthen it.
100%.
So much of that energy from those traditions, which I'm not like judging them, there's great people. I had a great experience in Bible college, despite the fact I probably am not where they would have liked me to end up in my life.
Right.
But to me, it was a great experience and there's really loving people and it was cool. Yeah. But that energy of let's fight, let's engage it, that is egoic ego energy that's fighting the darkness, which means to engage it, which means to strengthen it and actually reinforce it at a deeper level, as opposed to the welcoming, allowing, embracing in, recognizing it for what it is, taking it into yourself, taking ownership, and eventually surrendering it and letting it go. That is a very different kind of energy than the fighting of things. One, that's just the ego trying to overcome the ego by the strength of the ego, and it makes it worse.
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. This stuff started to really unfold for me when, again, a piece of my story, but back in school, one of the things I've always struggled with is like having like self-doubt and just being very, like, I'm a very introverted person to begin with. And so I'm very always in my head, but just very like, I've always been like a shy type of person, even as a kid, like I was always very shy. I really struggled with like confidence in school and stuff like that. And so when I got to Bible college and in these like power encounter classes and stuff, we start talking about like our childhood and our wounds and stuff. Like the biggest thing for me was always this lack of confidence and this low self-esteem. And for the longest time, that was labeled as, well, that's got to be a demon. That's got to be something in you that needs to be cast out. And so I can't tell you like how many literal like exorcisms and things like I went through with people praying around me. Most of it like fairly calm, just people praying, putting oil in my head. But sometimes people like raising their voice and like come out in the name of Jesus and things like that. And so for the like
bark.
Yeah,
bark at him.
Exactly, bark, foam at the mouth, do something. And so for the longest time, like I would go through these moments and the feelings would go away for a while, but then they would start to creep back in. And when they creep back in, you're told, well, the devil he goes away with one spirit goes away and brings back 7 more, that parable that Jesus talked about. And if you leave the door open, if there's a foothold, the devil will come in, all these different things. So it always became like it was my fault because, well, I'm not reading my Bible enough. I'm not doing this enough. I must have had, these bad thoughts or something like that is what brought in the devil back. And so then I would go through again, more prayer and more things to get rid of this thing. And so I brought this up to Alexander and I said to him, I said, look, my whole theology is being rethought. this is a huge piece of my upbringing. I don't know what to do with it. I said, this is what my story is. Help me understand this. He said that inside of you is not a demon. He said, that's a younger version of yourself. That's your inner child. He says, so tell me about your childhood. So I told him some things. He said, no wonder your inner child has no self-confidence. He goes, look at the things you were told as a child. He says, every time you're put in a situation now as an adult where that child is reminded of the situation he was in when he was younger, he's flinching up inside, freaking out, withdrawing, and doesn't want to have anything to do with the circumstances around him. So he's feeling very ashamed and very shy inside because he doesn't want to come out. And so he said, when you're demonizing that thing and you're trying to cast that thing out, he goes, imagine screaming at your 5-year-old daughter, go out in the name of Jesus, go to hell, all these different things. That's essentially what you're doing to your younger child. So he said, I want you to do an exercise where you try to befriend your younger child as opposed to trying to shame him and cast him away. And that was such an eye-opening moment for me, because that was one of the first times I really gave myself permission to look within and actually believe there's something good that's buried deep inside of me. Because again, it was always, at our root, we're bad, we're sinful, all these different things, and you have to find truth out there somewhere, because it's certainly not going to be in here. Once I started to really look in, befriend that younger child of mine, try to speak to that younger child like I would my daughter, it just opened up this whole different world where now I'm like, oh, like the pathway to truth, so to speak, really is one that you can find when you turn inward. It doesn't just it's not just out there somewhere in some place I have to travel, some place I have to get to. It really is within. And so everything you're saying is really resonating with a lot of where I'm at.
See, that's like a story like that. It's easy. Like, I'm sure for you now, being like just joking around, or me being around Pentecostal people, I can make my jokes and have fun with all that.
Sure,
but when you see the actual fruit of a child growing up within that, it's like unhealthy family. That's what's so tough for people when so many people are like, I'm deconstructing now and I'm changing things, which I totally understand. But I'm like, people are having to come to terms with religiosity, family systems, genetic predispositioning, but it's all entangled in this one cluster of a knot, and it's really hard. Like, I thought that was God. No, that was a very unhealthy family system that created this neurosis within you when you were a child. And now when you're older, it's being projected onto God being mad at you. But really, like if, for example, like I'm just saying, like, so
yeah, that's right.
You see the fruit of what it does to people long term, and it's tough. Like I went to this big church in my early 20s, or I don't know how old I was exactly. And I was still like, I had this spontaneous awakening moment. God, I'm 18. I'm like just really starting to go to church a couple, 2-3 years later. And there was this big altar call. I've told this story before, but it's funny, where it's like, you go to this massive church and there's an altar call and you're like, whoa, there's like 400 people here.
Yeah.
And you go the next week, you're like, whoa, it's the same 400 people. But I remember I must have responded because I was standing up there, but I remember the pastor very pumped up, very like, oh no, come on, let's go. Just talking very fast.
Yeah.
And he's like, does anyone have anxiety? And, people raise their hands, and he's like, in the name of Jesus, that anxiety's gone.
Yep.
And even at 21, I remember thinking, like, I was like, that's irresponsible.
Yeah.
That's very dangerous. That's damaging. And that's not how this works.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at this young, vulnerable person next to me who possibly has tears in their eyes, who's going to take what this religious figure says very seriously, feel good for the day, like you said. And then Thursday afternoon, when their patterns kick in, they're going to be confused. Maybe there'll be some shame. Maybe they'll think it's their fault. Maybe they think it's this. And I'm like, you cannot skip over the real radical work of transformation. That's right. Finding what's there, facing it, feeling it, taking it in, practicing acceptance, letting go. And that is not denying the power of God. That is entrusting and holding space for the things that we think, if we accept, are going to make us spontaneously combust. It's holding those things in the presence of God because of the trust that the power of God subtly and slowly carries us through the death. This is the death and resurrection to the other side every single time. That is not like talking about the integration of psychology and spirituality is not minimizing the presence of God. It is placing us and everything in its proper ecology and economy of how this all works. This is what spirit does. This is what we do. And it's a co-creative relationship. And it's so different when we're no longer like, let me just, it's willpower. Let me just will it. And all the strength of my ego, I think I'm going to just pray hard enough, cry hard enough, lift my hands high enough, weep harder, and somehow I'm going to create some magical incantation to make God or reality finally fix that thing within me, instead of learning how to sit with that thing myself, perhaps in the presence of a few loved ones who can help carry me through, where it's no longer my strength of fighting it. It's allowing it in and allowing the strength of God to undo it in the presence of love, and realize I'm actually more whole on the other side. That is a different orientation in this journey that makes it so much less like, it can feel like that energy of religion is always trying to conquer things, when to me that phrase is so important, of Jesus saying like I've already overcome the world.
That's right.
We don't have to conquer it. We have to trust it, allow it, let it be, allow God to do. And the flow things, everything starts, everyone can relax. For me, spirituality it's relaxing, it's uncoiling, it's taking that which is so wound up within us and loosening it, and realizing, hey, when I loosen my grip on all this, it didn't all dissipate, it didn't all disintegrate. And actually I'm more open, and I'm more loving, and I'm more humble than I was. So it's just a different energy in how we do that.
Yeah, that's so good. And just hearing what we said before about, the kind of the irresponsibility of some of those things, and just like having to talk about it in the book about, I think you said like grit your way through and will your way through like a certain circumstance, like the darkness or the pain or whatever. And then the shame on that is if it doesn't go away, then like you said, then it's your fault, because
Whose fault is
I
it? Of
must have done
course.
something wrong. Like I must not be doing it right, or there's some hidden sin in my life or whatever. But there's a friend of mine who also went to the same Bible college I went to. They went on like a spiritual retreat, and they were gone for like a weekend or something. At the end, they had this moment of prayer where they had a big cross up the front, and you had to leave something at the cross that you felt was weighing you down, because you're going to be giving this thing over to Christ. You're going to leave it in the retreat. You're going to go back into your life, and you're going to leave this thing behind. So it's like a very symbolic thing. And for her, it was always, she had been dealing with a lot of anxiety and things like that as a kid. And so she was on like various medications and stuff like that for anxiety. And she was encouraged to leave her anxiety medication at the cross. And so she left it at the cross and fully believed she was going to go back home. Everything was going to be fine, because she had this, experience. There was crying, there was music, there was prayer, there's all these different things. And for a couple days, it seemed to be okay. But once the high of that retreat wore down, and the real events of life start coming back in when you're back with your family and things like that, that kind of created these anxieties to begin with. There would panic, set in. And then the panic led to shame of, I must have done something wrong. And then it just kind of spiraled back into this place. But now she's in this place where she's learning that the medication helps me function on a regular basis. So this is not a bad thing. And B, all this anxiety comes from somewhere. And rather than push it away, I need to sit with it, and I need to figure it out. So she's in counseling and doing different things to kind of come to grips with this stuff. But again, like you just talked about, I mean, it's just all about welcoming that non-dualistic mindset of sit with this and learn from it, and move into it. Yeah. It's so good. So good. All right. So my last question for you, I want to talk to you about, where is that piece? Oh, about forgiveness, because you talk about in the book about kind of forgiveness in the making of a mystic, and that idea of how there's different levels of forgiveness. And I might totally botch this up when I position this question to you, so you can feel free to go and kind of undo what I might do. But you talked about how there's like different layers. Like you need to, for instance, like if a friend hurts you, your friend leaves, you forgive your friend on that higher level because I'm going to forgive this person for what they did to me, the pain they caused. But underneath that is a much deeper level where it's I need to almost forgive the universe in a way because these things happen. Like this happens. You become close to somebody and they hurt you. It's not just this one person does it to you, but it happens in all relationships everywhere. And so kind of getting that place where you don't just forgive the person, you forgive the universe, and again welcome these things into your midst. And so I was wondering if you can maybe take us a little deeper into that, because I never heard anything like that before. Like forgiveness for me was always, 70 times 7, forgive the individual, and that was really it. And that's important, but then underneath that there's a whole nother level. So take us there.
Yeah, that's a great question. Out of any, I told you off air before, like, obviously I'm doing a lot of interviews right now, and no one's asked me about that. And I think it's one of the most important things.
So important. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I think that stuck out to me the most in the book was that section.
To me, like I have a second book coming out in 2020, in January 2023.
Oh, great.
And it's called The Joy of Letting Go. And it's how letting go is not one thing we do. Letting go is that which holds together everything we do.
Yeah.
So beneath the surface of our lives all of the time, there's forgiveness, acceptance, and letting go are all really interconnected. You can't forgive without letting go. You can't let go without practicing acceptance. Those are all connected.
Sure.
Sometimes it's forgiving a person. Sometimes it's accepting a circumstance, but it's the same inner mechanism that is working when we do those things. And Jesus's teaching on forgiveness are very, 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 very radical.
Yeah.
And I bring that up in the book. I think the 7 times 7. And so I say, there's a really challenging, radical way of reading that. And one of them is every time somebody forgives you, every time somebody harms you or wrongs you, you are to forgive them. That's already a great challenge.
Right. That's not easy to wrap.
That's already a lot, right? For pretty much every human being, that is an amazing thing to ask.
Yeah.
Now, what I say is, of course, people can do all of the commentary work, all the cultural, context. I get all that. So you can do all that. But there's another even more radical way. If that's not even hard enough as it is, or amazing, there's an even more radical meaning getting at the roots of things. There's another radical reading of that text that doesn't just say you are to forgive everybody when they hurt you. It says, actually, the most radical cosmic universal thing you can do is to forgive reality itself for being flawed.
Yeah.
There is the individual experience. That's why the quote in the section you're talking about is real freedom comes not from forgiving the concrete person. It comes from accepting the cosmic pattern.
Yeah.
Every individual experience you have with people. Now, people listening can't see me, but Ben can see me right now. And this is my very preacher mode because I don't have a whiteboard, so I'm making sense with my hands. Right? But every time you're interacting with the concrete person, when there's forgiveness, the concrete person forms a ladder that you climb up to eventually see the cosmic pattern in place that your spirit is really wrestling with and struggling to accept. So it's the person, but it's always bigger than the person, right? It's a person, but it's actually a pattern. It's the pattern through them in the moment, but it's actually a pattern beyond them in life itself. So I would say whenever a person does something, it's never a completely isolated act. It's always it's a particular instantiation of a pattern that exists in their life. You can spot that quickly. People are living out a pattern. So if someone does something 2 times, you're like, oh, that's a pattern. Okay, now that helps me how to engage with them. Do I need boundaries? Do I do this? Are they like this?
Yeah.
To extend that even further, it's not just a pattern in them, it's a pattern in life. So I'll give some examples. In the hard moments, it's not just me forgiving this person for turning their back on me when I opened my heart and gave them everything I had. It's accepting that we live in a world where I can give everything and people can still end up walking away. Yeah. The concrete situation, I'm forgiving this person when they betrayed me. The cosmic pattern, I'm having a hard time accepting that you can love someone wholeheartedly and they can still walk away. The person is an expression of the larger pattern, right? It's not just forgiving him for leaving when he was the one I counted on the most. It's accepting that sometimes the people you count on are not going to stick around and eventually are going to leave. And to put it more in a more general sense, it's not just me forgiving this person for hurting me. It's forgiving reality itself for being a place where I can get hurt. It's not just the person, it's the pattern. And why that is so important, and why I think if we can start to practice that and become that, it greases up the track of transformation more than most people can imagine. Yeah. Because people keep expressing patterns that are hurting us, and every time we get surprised. We get surprised or disappointed or hurt. Where if you accept the cosmic pattern, hey, sometimes you're going to love people really well and they're going to walk away. If I've accepted that at a universal level, hey, that's a really hard, I've already wept over that. I've grieved over that. I've wrestled with that in the sense of reality, and I've allowed it and I've surrendered to it and trusted God with it. Now, when I come back, I don't have to shut my heart down. I can consciously choose to love this person. And then when they walk away, you know what happens? I'm not surprised. Yeah, it might hurt for a moment, but I'm not resisting it. I'm not rejecting it. I'm not fighting with it. I'm not having a hard time accepting it. I've already accepted at a universal pattern what this person's doing in an individual sense. So when you do it, I'm like, it doesn't surprise me. It'll hurt me, but it's not bothering me and leaving me frustrated or stuck for years, because I already have accepted this is how it is. That's why I would say you can be free from any resistance to pain while still feeling the reality of pain. Yeah, it hurts, but I'm not fighting it now. I'm not looking around like, how could this happen? Yeah. I'm not like, God, no. Like, the peace the mystic has in public is born out of the tears they've shed in private. Yeah. And the mystic has wrestled with those things, accepted things, let go of expectations, faced the cosmic patterns of, here's the cosmic patterns of, yes, it is that hard. And also I've discovered, here's the cosmic patterns of the foundational goodness. Now I can return to the individual person and it's okay. Oh, you said so. Oh, I thought I did a good job, caring for you, and you still turned on me. Man, it sucks. I wish it wasn't like that, but yeah, that happens. And now guess what? I thought about it for 5 to 10 minutes. I let go of it. Yeah, the hurt might stay with me for a little bit, depending on the nature of our relationship. Sure. But I'm not fighting reality. Like, the mystic stops fighting reality because they've embraced reality for what it is. So that's a practice. Like, anytime you're wrestling with something in the concrete, struggling to accept a pattern that is cosmic and bigger than that. And if you can get to the bigger thing and realize what you're really fighting with, it makes all the little things so much easier. Because I'm like, this doesn't surprise me. I've already accepted people are going to hurt me. It's okay. You know what I'm saying? So
that's really good. And while you're talking, I wrote down pretty much what you just said. I said that I can't read my chicken scratch, but I said if you accept reality, that kind of sets the foundation for individual forgiveness.
That's right? Exactly.
And then maybe that's why, now that I think of it, maybe that's why Jesus seems so good at forgiveness. Because you think of Peter, you think of, being denied 3 times, you think of, Judas, things like that. Like, one of the things that always stood out to me is, like, when I read those stories, it doesn't seem very hung up on it. Like, it doesn't seem very hung up on Peter denying him. He just kind of looks at him, and like the look is that's just the way that life works, like, there are no hard feelings kind of thing, and I wonder if that's kind of the key there, is that, Jesus was this mystic, and Jesus was this person who understood that this is the way that reality works. People get afraid, and people maybe say things like Peter they don't necessarily mean or don't necessarily believe. And I'm not going to take that personally, because this is what happens. And so it's expected to happen. And therefore, I forgive him. And that's it.
Yeah, I don't know if this is verbatim, but I'm taking this from Ken Wilber. But Wilber says it hurts because it's painful. It bothers you because you can't accept it.
Ah, yeah.
Things will still, the individual instantiations of whatever this is, it will still hurt. But the bothering, the frustrating, the I can't move on, I can't let go, those are all forms of non-acceptance.
Yeah.
And if I've accepted at the cosmic pattern, I can still feel the hurt of it, but I'm not bothered by it. I'm not fighting with it. I've already come to terms that I cannot create, I cannot love, I cannot give myself to this world without facing criticism, without having people betray me, without people having opinions about me.
Yeah.
It'll hurt if I hear something, but I'm no longer wrestling with it. The universal acceptance, like you said, allows me to return and come back to the concreteness and forgive so quickly, because I'm not forgiving you. I've already forgiven life itself, and you are just a particular expression of how this all works, and that's okay.
Right.
That to Mike, you connect with that. It's like, I'm not fighting all these other things you're wrestling with at an individual level. They'll still hurt, but you can let go of that. Like sometimes in the book, I'm like, you can let go of something in 5 minutes, or you can let go of something in 5 years. But whenever you decide to finally face it, it's the same thing you have to let go of.
That's right. That's right.
So it's again, we have the power to choose to make decisions that open up the path further or close it down. And the Spirit is faithfully, humbly, that's one thing I don't hear talked about all the time that I love, is the humility of God. The God who knocks on the door and says, I'm not going to coerce you, I'm not going to force you, I'm not going to make you, I'm not going to shame you, I'm not going to guilt trip you, but I am going to keep inviting you further. And the moment that you open up, the moment you wake up, the moment you slow down, the moment you start listening, God's like, I'm faithful and I'm loving and I'm ready to bring you along the journey. That's why the great Meister Eckhart has this quote where he's like, the moment you find yourself ready, God has to pour himself into you. It's something like that.
Yeah.
But the humility, like, we have limitations on love. We want to withhold love. Like, I did this for them and they didn't respond the way I like, so now I'm going to withhold, or I'm not going to love them. And the humility of a love that infinitely pours itself out and faithfully invites us forward. No matter how many times we forget and just don't pay attention, the moment we open up, the Spirit's right here. This is where we begin. To me, I'm like, that's the gospel, is that right there. To me, that's why I'm a Christian. That's why I love this. That's why I am who I am.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. All right. So as we wrap up.
No, we just hit almost hour 1, and we're going to hour 2 right now.
We're going to hour 2, and then we're gonna make a whole day seminar out of this. But let's talk to the person who's listening to this, and this is all kind of ringing in their spirit. They're going, yes, 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 aha. What advice do you have for somebody who wants to pursue that mystical path, especially somebody who comes from the kind of world that I described before, that very evangelical world where this can often be seen as new agey in that world? This is not, this isn't the truth, but yet they feel in their
heart,
which
is hilarious to me, because I'm like, this is all to me. I'm like, this is the most Christian thing,
and it's in the Bible. How can you not see it? It's like right there. But I talk to that person, like, what advice do you have? Like, where should they begin to explore? What kind of, not changes, but what kind of things can they like adopt into their life to kind of pursue these paths?
Well, I think the first thing I would say, even before we totally ground it in the practical, is, and it's the last part of the book, the subtitle, like, why it's okay for everyone to relax. I wish for people who have grown up bounded and tight and struggled, and who come out with the neurosis or the shame or the guilt and all that, which is totally understandable and so hard. It's a lifelong journey to grow beyond and to transcend and to move beyond, or to move through.
Sure.
I would love to say, and more importantly, I would love for them to eventually experience in Christ, like, hey, we're okay here.
Yeah. It's
okay to relax a little. There's no angry chess player in the sky moving the pieces of life again. No one's against you.
Yeah.
this whole thing's for you. Yes, of course, there's death and hurt and pain. Yeah, of course. But the spirit, the foundation of the center, the eyes at the center of the universe are looking at you with an affirmative gaze of love.
That's right. That's right.
And we can be invited to trust that and to settle into that and to relax into that and to uncoil a bit and to trust that. And for me, that's the pastoral natural movement, is to desire to lead people into that and to help guide them there. So one, the good news is, hey, we can relax. I don't mean that in a pithy way. I mean, our bodies, our minds, our hearts can be aligned, and we can relax into something that's larger than us, because the river's carrying us, the ocean's larger than us, and we're in it. And we just need to learn how to float and to trust it. On the practical level, there's a few things. One, explore, experiment, and hopefully eventually discover what concrete practices, rituals, and events help ground you in the presence of goodness and God and love, and help you feel the simple feeling of being your true self, where you can relax in that presence, because they're experienced simultaneously. So some people might say, some people who tend to be on the more like, have a tendency towards like the busy, their minds are very scattered, their bodies are in motion, they might look at me and say, I'm never going to sit for 20 minutes in silence like you. I'm not. And and as a pastor, I'm like, that's fine. Like, I never try to force people to do anything one way. I personally don't care. I'm like, well, then maybe for you, a walking meditation is better, because for some people, a slight movement of the body helps occupy their monkey mind enough. It helps give some physical energy to help align them and calm them down and be present. Hey, that's fine. If it's this other, like at one point in my life, in my 20s, I would listen to Gregorian chants in my headphones and just focus on my breath. That was a practice I did for a while. You could hang upside down on moon boots for all I care. They're all fingers pointing to the moon. Spiritual practices are pointing. They're not the point. The point is being allowing yourself to fall apart in the presence of God, wherever that happens, and to get a taste of your true self and get a glimpse of the goal of life as a whole in God. And you have to find what's right for you to do that, and return to that over and over and over and over again. What James Finley calls, his daily rendezvous with God. The more you intentionally go to that place, the more you organically live from that place for the rest of your life. So I'm here with you, Glenn, we're talking, but my heart is up on that mountain, breathing, present with God. And I'm carrying that peace, that knowing of who I am into this conversation, because I've gone there intentionally so much, it starts to become who you are, and is it woven into the very day-to-day existence of my life. Like I can be grounded in my day-to-day life like I am up there, because I've gone there so much. You just start to become that. So that's not something you learn in your mind where it's like, oh, I learned the concept and now I'll move on. No, I return over and over and over again. I told a guy in my church years ago, I said, man, if you do 20 minutes in silence 4 days a week and you really commit to that, in 5 years, you'll start to get it. Yeah. But no one wants to hear that. But that's true about friendships and a marriage. Like you can't just say I love you and that's it. It's like, no, we still have to connect. We still need to align. We still need to, me and my wife on our lanai, which is a balcony for people on the mainland, but on our lanai, drinking wine, eating meat and cheese, talking about our kids and talking about our future, and still laughing. And we're returning to each other over and over, not just to know. You can know your partner loves you, but you have to experience, connect with, and actually receive the love. That's the same thing in our life with God. It's not enough to believe in God. You have to experience being seen, being known, and being cared for by God. And the more you do that, the more you'll just start to trust that and become a person who has their feet grounded in that every single day. And the way you do that will be, here's a little freedom for people, and in their exploration, I don't read the Bible devotionally. I just haven't for so long personally,
Yeah.
I just, because the Bible for me is learning the story, being called into the story, learning about the concrete way of Jesus, but it's not the same as a direct experience and being present in the presence of God. That I need less words for that. Too many words get in the way of that experience for me. So reading is information, but it's not transformation for me. I don't look to the Bible. I don't look to the Bible for direct personal experience. I'm not joking. Last night, I have a 5-year-old daughter named Michaela Brave and a 3-year-old son named True. And we were reading before they were going to sleep, like this kid's Bible. And gosh, I can't remember. Oh, it was the Noah story, right? So I'm like, I'm going to tell you this story like this. And then when you get turn 16, I'll tell you like, here's another way of seeing this. It's all what's developmentally appropriate, right? Right now, sure, this happened.
Right. The animals were so cute.
But my daughter was like kind of like sitting, like laying on me, like in my lap, and she was talking, and she was like we prayed or something, and she's like I have a question. I'm like, okay. And she's like,
here we go.
But she's like, how do you hear God? Right. And I said, as a quick sort of pastoral, we can't get into the complexities. It's more like it's more like a resonance, it's more like a whatever. Right. And I said, well, sweetie, one way to hear God is to read the Bible, because whatever, like God speaks through the Bible or something like that. And she's like, yeah, well, that's learning about God. But how do you like hear God? And I'm like, how are you already knowing this? She's already like, that's information, but what I'm looking for is direct knowing. And I'm like, you are my daughter, and I love you so much.
Yes.
But I think that's
so funny.
The ultimate practice is what is tethering you to the Spirit, what is helping you feel loved and feel seen, and whatever those practices are, then that you find that and you return to that again and again and again, and you'll trust it more, and you return again and again, and you forget. There's no shame or guilt for I've had a practice. I've been spending time in silence for like 20 years. And I still have resistance to intentional times of silence. I'm still like, oh, I'm good right now, or I'll just do this. Like, and I've been doing it for 20 years. And you spend time and you forget and you get comfortable, then you return again, but you return again and again to the eyes who are looking at you and undoing you in your naked, vulnerable presence, being like, just, it's enough already. Just, it's like, honestly, to me, it's a funny thing of God's looking at the world, just like, let me love you. Stop fighting. What do you like? There's a dilemma, like everybody wakes up in the river, gets out of the river, and goes to the rest of the world begging people for Dixie cups of water.
That's right.
You woke up, the thing is to trust it and allow it. And whatever helps you do that. And what doesn't, who cares? That's not the point,
If it works for somebody else, but not for you, it doesn't matter.
You want to you want to read Sanskrit or chant in a language you don't understand, because that helps stop your monkey mind, help you be present. Go for it. Get Rosetta Stone for chanting. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me.
Right. Yeah. That's so good. Yeah. I've always had this fascination with the Bible, just because I've been in it since I was a kid, and, obviously in college and seminary and stuff. And I've always just been like fascinated by it. But there was a season where that was always the thing that really connected me. It felt like grounded me in my spiritual life and in God. And I just felt like I was able to really communicate with God through it. But there was a season where I was like, I can't read this without the lens that I've always read it through. Like, it's becoming damaging to me now. Like I have to stop reading it. So I put my Bible away for quite a long time. And then I've picked it back up, and I only read like the Gospels now. Like I really don't read. Paul is just to me, like he's just rambling about nonsense. Old Testament, I could pretend I understand it, but I don't understand much of what goes on in the Old Testament. And Revelations is its own kind of thing. But the Gospels, for whatever reason, really just awakened something in me. And now I've also discovered, like Bart Ehrman has a book called The Other Gospels, where it's all these other stories of Jesus that aren't in the Bible. And I didn't realize that there's hundreds of stories that they found. And there's some of them are the same that are in the four gospels, some are very different, but even reading those, like, I love to just place myself in the story. And like, I just feel like the Spirit brings to mind like all different sorts of things that are true, for life. And for me, like, that's something that, call it a time of meditation, a time of whatever, like just to read those, sit with it for a little while, write something in
Mm,
my journal. It just does
mm,
something to me. And I find that the more I do it, the more grounded I feel. But to your point, if I get to it, like, I'm like, "Ah, I don't have time today, or I'm too tired, or I'm good, whatever. I feel I'm in a pretty good spot, and I don't do it for a while. I definitely feel the lack of it in my
mm,
life, and I feel that draw to kind of go back to it.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. Yeah,
So good.
man.
So
Yeah,
good,
no.
man. I love it. Well, hey, we're just about out of time. But before you go, where can people find you online to interact with you, your work? The book comes out in May, right?
May 31st,
Okay.
Choir Publishing. Find it on Amazon at the time.
Yep.
And the best place to follow me is I have my own podcast called The Church Needs Therapy. Church Needs Therapy podcast. The best place to like stay up day to day is my Instagram at Kevin Sweeney 1,
Mhm.
because that's where like book release and prints, because I'm like doing prints from the book and this here thing to leading up to it. It's all through there.
Okay.
And yeah, the book is it's all this stuff we're talking about, but for me, it's really grounding this in like the mysticism of every day.
Yeah.
The non-dual mind is not just this massive thing to understand. It's something that grounds us and enables us to be at peace with people in conflict, to not get stuck in an unforgiveness and all these things. So for me, it's a very practical, despite the title, like it's an extremely practical and pastoral book from my
Very much.
perspective,
Very much. Yeah.
So yeah, just from the book, I hope people get that glimpse of like, oh, there's more life ahead. There's more peace, more joy, more freedom, without getting caught in all of these unnecessary things that aren't the substance of the Spirit that is always with us and inviting us forward, which is what I see as the deepest reality of the world we live in. So
That's right. That's right.
yeah, and I just want to say to you, Glenn, like as a first-time writer, without having creds and without seeing me on so many other podcasts, like now to take the time, to take the risk, to extend the invitation here is something I don't take for granted, and I'm really, really grateful for. And this was such a good time. So thank you to you and to the listeners tuning in just for this space, because it's really, really meaningful for me right now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And I feel like we have a lot more to talk about. So
Yeah, man,
maybe we could do a round two.
yeah, definitely stay in touch.
That'd be awesome. All right, man. Well, you have a great day.